The rain hadn't stopped for days, turning Willow Creek's dirt roads into rivers of mud. The farmhouse where it happened stood at the end of a forgotten trail, windows boarded, a faint odor of rot escaping through the cracks. The local sheriff's report was short, almost too short. 17-year-old Noah Turner found next to his parents' lifeless bodies, apparent drug-induced frenzy, case considered closed. But nothing here felt simple. The crime scene was untouched since that night, yet the blood patterns on the wooden floor told a different story. Hesitation, confusion, almost like the killer wasn't certain of what they were doing. The needle found near Noah's hand didn't match any prescription on record. The neighbors whispered that Noah had been spiraling for months, lost to the drugs that had been quietly circulating through Willow Creek's underbelly. Yet some swore they saw another figure leaving the farmhouse that night, a shadow slipping into the woods before the sirens arrived. As I stepped inside, the door creaked like it hadn't been opened in years. Dust floated in the beam of my flashlight, settling over two old armchairs still facing the fireplace. The silence here was heavy, oppressive. This wasn't just a crime of addiction. Something far darker was buried in these walls, waiting to be unearthed. Morning light did nothing to soften the farmhouse's grim aura. The sheriff's men had left their chalk outlines to fade with the dust, as if eager to erase the scene from memory. Noah Turner sat in a holding cell 2 miles away, unresponsive, trembling under a thin blanket, lips cracked and eyes hollow. They said he confessed. They said the drugs made him do it. But the timeline didn't add up. A broken clock on the kitchen wall had stopped at 2:47 a.m., 2 hours before neighbors reported screams. Blood splatter on the hallway doorframe was too high for someone Noah's size to have caused, unless he'd stood on something that wasn't there anymore. And then there was the note, half burned in the fireplace, barely legible. They know. We have to stop before he talks. No signature, no context, just those words surrounded by ash. Outside, the wind howled through the skeletal trees, carrying a faint metallic scent from the nearby creek. Willow Creek wasn't just a small town with a tragedy. It felt like a place where secrets festered, where pain was passed from one generation to the next, hidden behind white picket fences and polite Sunday smiles. If Noah didn't kill his parents, then someone wanted the world to believe he did. And if he did, something or someone might have pushed him there. Noah Turner didn't look like a killer. He looked like a ghost that hadn't found its way out of his own skin. Sitting across from him, I saw more than the hollow eyes of a boy lost to addiction. I saw terror. His hands shook, not just from withdrawal, but from something deeper gnawing at his mind. "They said I did it," he whispered, almost too faint to hear. "Maybe I did, but I wasn't alone in that house." His voice cracked, and a shadow of panic crossed his face. There was someone else, watching. The sheriff claimed Noah had confessed hours earlier, yet there were no signed statements, no audio, nothing but the word of tired deputies who wanted the nightmare wrapped up in a bow. When I pressed for details, doors closed, eyes turned cold. The town didn't want questions. Later, as I walked back to my car, I noticed fresh cigarette butts near the station's rear exit. Someone had been standing there long enough to burn through a pack, watching. My instinct screamed that Noah's story wasn't just a delusion. There was a presence hovering over this case, one that didn't want me here. And for the first time since arriving in Willow Creek, I felt it too. That eerie weight on the back of my neck, as if invisible eyes followed every step I took. The farmhouse felt different this time, not just empty, but alert, as if the walls remembered my last visit and didn't welcome my return. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a heavy mist that clung to my coat and blurred the horizon. Every step on the warped floorboards echoed too loudly, like a warning. The bloodstains were still there, dried and dark, but something had shifted. A chair that once faced the fireplace now lay on its side, though I was certain it had been upright before. Fresh mud tracked from the back door toward the kitchen, faint but undeniable. Someone else had been here since the police locked this place down. In the corner, beneath a loose floorboard, I found a scrap of cloth, cheap denim, stained faintly with what looked like oil or ash. Not Noah's clothes, too big, too rough. Whoever this belonged to had been close to the scene that night, maybe closer than Noah ever was. As I slipped the cloth into an evidence bag, I felt it again, that creeping sensation of being watched. Through the broken window, beyond the mist, a dark silhouette stood by the tree line, motionless. No face, no details, just a figure that seemed carved from the fog itself. By the time I stepped outside, the figure was gone. Only a single cigarette butt smoldered in the mud, smoke curling upward like a silent message. Leave or you'll regret staying. Sleep didn't come easy in Willow Creek. The motel walls were thin, letting in every creak of the building and every whisper of the wind outside. Around 2 a.m., a knock shattered the stillness. 3 soft raps, measured and deliberate. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty, except for a folded piece of paper on the floor. Stop digging. The boy's blood isn't the only one that will spill. The handwriting was jagged, rushed, but the message was clear. Someone knew what I was doing, and they didn't want the truth uncovered. My pulse pounded as I scanned the parking lot. A dark sedan idled across the street, headlights off, engine barely audible under the rain. By the time I reached the edge of the lot, it was gone, tires slicing through puddles, leaving only ripples behind. Inside my room, the air felt heavier, like someone had been there before me. My files on Noah's case were scattered across the desk, pages crumpled as if read by unseen hands, and on the motel's cracked mirror, drawn in condensation, a single word waited for me: run. This was no longer just about clearing Noah's name. Someone in this town had orchestrated a brutal crime and found a convenient scapegoat, and now they wanted me out of the picture before I got close enough to see their face. The locals swore the silos had been empty for decades, just rusting towers on the outskirts of town. But last night's threats didn't stop me from following the muddy tire tracks that disappeared into the overgrown weeds near them. The silence here was unnatural. No birds, no wind, just the hum of something unseen beneath the metal shells. Inside, the air stank of chemicals and gasoline. Makeshift tables lined the concrete floor, littered with scorched spoons, burned foil, and small glass vials. It wasn't just a hideout, it was a workshop. Whoever supplied Noah with poison had been cooking it here for a long time, feeding the veins of this dying town. Among the mess, I found a torn ledger page with names and numbers scrawled in shorthand. One name stood out: Turner. Not Noah's, but his father's, the same man everyone described as a pillar of the community, a devoted husband, a victim. But this ledger painted another picture: debts, late payments, and threats tied to a growing drug trade that reached far beyond Willow Creek. A metallic clang echoed from above. I froze, flashlights sweeping the rusted catwalk overhead. A silhouette darted between beams, fast and silent. By the time I reached the stairs, the intruder was gone, leaving only a fresh cigarette ember glowing in the dark. Whoever orchestrated this tragedy wasn't just covering a murder. They were running an empire built on addiction, and the Turners had been entangled in it long before the bloodshed. I should have known last night's silence was a trap. Driving back from the silos, the road felt wrong. Too empty, too quiet, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Half a mile past the old overpass, headlights flared in my rear-view mirror, closing fast. The black sedan from the motel parking lot roared up behind me, bumpers kissing, trying to push me off the wet asphalt. My hands tightened on the wheel as I swerved, barely keeping the car steady on the rain-slick road. A second vehicle appeared ahead, parked sideways, blocking the path. This wasn't a warning anymore. It was an execution. I killed the headlights, veered hard right, and slammed through the ditch, mud and branches battering the undercarriage until I skidded to a stop in a thicket of trees. Heart pounding, I ducked low, watching through the windshield as two men got out of the sedan. One paced the road with a flashlight. The other stood still, smoking, calm as death itself. Even from the shadows, I knew he was the same figure who'd been watching me at the farmhouse. They searched for a while, then vanished into the night. Only the cigarette smoke lingered, coiling through the mist like a promise. Next time, they wouldn't miss. This case had stopped being about Noah Turner days ago. Now it was about staying alive, long enough to drag Willow Creek's rot into the light. By day, the community center was the heart of Willow Creek, a place where neighbors gathered for charity drives and Sunday suppers. But behind its locked basement door, I found a different kind of ledger, one that made my stomach knot. Stacks of sealed envelopes lay inside a rusted filing cabinet, each marked with initials and dates. Payoffs, bribes, protection money. It wasn't just a drug trade. It was an organized network keeping the entire town quiet. One envelope was heavier than the rest. Inside, I found a photograph of Mayor Ellison shaking hands with a man I recognized immediately, Noah's father. The caption scribbled on the back read, "Partnership sealed, payments due monthly." So this wasn't a story of a boy losing control. This was a chain reaction born from greed and power, with Noah's family tangled in its center. And Mayor Ellison, the man leading candlelight vigils for the victims, might be the one who lit the match in the first place. Before I could leave, footsteps echoed upstairs. Voices murmured, too low to catch words, but sharp enough to tell me I wasn't welcome. A door slammed, and then silence. I slipped out the back, the evidence clutched tight, every instinct screaming that I was getting closer to the truth, and closer to a grave I hadn't yet dug. By day, the community center was the heart of Willow Creek, a place where neighbors gathered for charity drives and Sunday suppers. But behind its locked basement door, I found a different kind of ledger, one that made my stomach knot. Stacks of sealed envelopes lay inside a rusted filing cabinet, each marked with initials and dates. Payoffs, bribes, protection money. It wasn't just a drug trade, it was an organized network keeping the entire town quiet. One envelope was heavier than the rest. Inside, I found a photograph of Mayor Ellison shaking hands with a man I recognized immediately. Noah's father. The caption scribbled on the back read, "Partnership sealed, payments due monthly." So this wasn't a story of a boy losing control. This was a chain reaction born from greed and power, with Noah's family tangled in its center, and Mayor Ellison, the man leading candlelight vigils for the victims, might be the one who lit the match in the first place. Before I could leave, footsteps echoed upstairs. Voices murmured, too low to catch words, but sharp enough to tell me I wasn't welcome. A door slammed, and then silence. I slipped out the back, the evidence clutched tight, every instinct screaming that I was getting closer to the truth, and closer to a grave I hadn't yet dug. Noah looked worse than before. His face was pale, lips cracked, hands trembling in his lap like fragile bird wings. The sheriff stood outside the glass, arms crossed, making sure I knew my time was limited. I slid a photograph across the table, the one of Mayor Ellison shaking his father's hand. Noah's sunken eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen in him before. Recognition and fear. "They made him do it," he whispered, voice hoarse. "Dad owed them so much. When he couldn't pay, they came after us. The drugs, they weren't mine. They gave them to me. Said if I didn't take the fall, they'd bury me next to them." The truth spilled out in broken fragments. His father had been laundering money through the mayor's community projects, funneling cash from the drug trade. When the debts piled too high, his family became an example, a warning to others in town who might step out of line. Noah had been left alive, drugged, and staged as the killer. I reached for the door but stopped cold. The sheriff was gone. In his place, one of Ellison's men leaned against the wall, staring through the glass with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A silent message. "Talk all you want. You won't live long enough to tell the world." This wasn't just about proving Noah's innocence anymore. It was about surviving long enough to drag the devil out of Willow Creek's Sunday best. The night smelled of wet asphalt and river mist. I had just left the holding facility, headlights slicing through the darkness, when the first hit came, an unmarked pickup ramming the back of my car. Tires screeched, metal screamed, and I fought the wheel, barely keeping from spinning into the guardrail. Another vehicle cut me off from the front, forcing me onto the narrow bridge. Two men got out, faces hidden under hoods, crowbars glinting under the weak streetlights. They didn't shout or threaten, they just advanced, slow and certain, like hunters closing in on a trapped animal. One swung first, shattering my window in a spray of glass. I ducked, kicked the door open, and threw my weight into him, sending him stumbling toward the rail. The second man lunged, but a poorly timed strike sent his crowbar clanging against the pavement. I grabbed it, swung hard, and created just enough space to sprint back to my car. Engine roaring, tires spinning, I tore down the bridge as bullets cracked the night air, ricocheting off steel beams. In the rearview mirror, the attackers shrank into the fog, but the message was clear. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was an execution order. Somebody in Willow Creek had decided I was too close to the truth, and if I didn't act fast, Noah Turner wouldn't be the only name on this town's growing list of victims. The storage unit sat on the edge of town, a nondescript metal box like dozens of others. But the padlock on this one had been replaced recently. Too new, too clean. I picked it open, under the cover of rain and silence, heart hammering like a countdown clock. Inside, the smell of mold and gasoline clung to the air. Rows of bankers' boxes lined the walls, most marked only with dates. But one, shoved into the farthest corner, carried a single word: Turner. I opened it and found contracts, bank slips, and stacks of photographs. Noah's father standing beside Mayor Ellison at various fundraisers, handing over envelopes, shaking hands with men I'd only seen in shadows before. And beneath the paperwork, a cassette tape, its label smeared but still readable. November 11, final meeting. I slid the tape into a dusty player on a shelf. The audio crackled, then came the voices, Ellison's smooth, measured tones saying, "If he doesn't pay by midnight, we make it loud. The boy takes the blame. No witnesses left standing." A second voice, unfamiliar, rough, replied, "And if he talks?" Ellison's answer was ice. "Then we bury the whole family." The blood in my veins turned to iron. This wasn't rumor anymore. It was proof, a blueprint for murder, sanctioned by the most powerful man in town. As I pocketed the tape, headlights swept across the unit door. A car pulled up outside, doors slamming. More than one set of footsteps. I had minutes, maybe seconds, to disappear before Ellison's cleanup crew made this evidence and me vanish forever. I spread the evidence across the motel bed like a deck of poisoned cards. The photographs, the ledger, the tape. Every piece screamed the same truth. Noah Turner wasn't a killer. He was a sacrifice. But proof meant nothing in a town where the sheriff and the mayor pulled the same strings. I needed a different move, one that couldn't be buried under threats or gunfire. At dawn, the plan began to take shape. There was a town meeting tomorrow night in the old church, hosted by Mayor Ellison himself. If I could get the tape into the hands of enough townsfolk before he arrived, whispers would spread faster than fear. If he tried to shut me down publicly, he'd risk showing his teeth. It was reckless, maybe suicidal, but waiting had already cost 3 lives and nearly taken mine. Tonight, I'd visit the local radio tower, tap into their emergency broadcast line, and schedule a message to air right before the meeting. I'd make sure everyone in Willow Creek heard Ellison order a family's death with their own ears. The risk was obvious. Once I made a move, the mayor's men wouldn't wait for subtlety. They'd come fast, heavy, and final. I caught my reflection in the cracked motel mirror, eyes sunken, jaw tight, a man betting his life on one desperate play. This town had thrived on silence for too long. If I failed tomorrow, the next sound I'd hear might be the last one. A bullet finding its mark in the dark. The radio tower groaned under my weight as I climbed, the metal slick from rain. The storm had returned, a fitting backdrop for the gamble I was about to take. Inside the small transmitter shack, static hissed through battered speakers as I patched the cassette player into the emergency broadcast line. One flick of a switch and the whole town would hear Mayor Ellison's voice sealing the Turners' fate. But just as the tape rolled, footsteps crunched outside. Heavy, fast. A silhouette appeared in the doorway, one of Ellison's men, gun drawn, face grim under the flickering light. He lunged before I could react, sending us both crashing into the equipment. Sparks flew, the cassette skipping, playing fragments of Ellison's words. "Make it loud, boy takes the blame," before cutting to static. I fought for control, elbowing free, but another figure joined the first. 2 against 1, in a cramped metal room high above the town, lightning flashing through broken windows. I grabbed the tape, bolted, and barely managed to leap off the last rung of the tower ladder before bullets shredded the night air behind me. By the time I reached the old church, drenched and breathless, the townspeople were already gathering inside. I slipped the damaged tape into the old PA system, praying the storm hadn't killed it completely. The room hushed, every eye on me as I pressed play. The tape whirred, crackled, then Ellison's voice filled the church. "If he doesn't pay by midnight, we make it loud." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The mayor, standing near the altar, froze mid-smile, eyes narrowing into something feral. For the first time, Willow Creek had heard the truth, and now there was no turning back. The church erupted in chaos. The mayor barked orders, his men drawing weapons, but the townspeople weren't blind anymore. Shouts rose, chairs scraped, a mob of fear and anger swelling like a storm ready to break. I held the tape recorder high. "You all heard it," I shouted over the noise. "This wasn't a tragedy, it was a message, and your mayor delivered it." Ellison's polished mask cracked, his voice turning venomous. "You think anyone will believe a drifter over me?" He spat, but his eyes darted nervously toward the crowd. For once, power wasn't on his side. A gunshot rang out, deafening in the old stone building. One of Ellison's men had aimed for me, but the bullet lodged in the church's wooden beam. Panic erupted. People screamed, ducking for cover, but others surged forward, knocking the gunman to the ground. A second shot echoed, this one tearing through a stained glass window as I dove for cover. When the smoke cleared, Ellison was gone, dragged toward the back door by his loyal men. I followed into the rain-soaked night, heart pounding, knowing this had to end, now or never. We met at the edge of the churchyard, lightning flashing between us. He raised a pistol, but before he could fire, townsfolk flooded out behind me, voices uniting, shouting his name like a curse. The mayor hesitated just long enough for me to wrench the gun from his hand and throw him to the mud. By dawn, Ellison was in handcuffs, his empire crumbling with every confession his men made. Noah Turner walked free that morning, a boy broken but breathing, no longer a scapegoat for a town's sins. As I drove out of Willow Creek, rain streaking the windshield, I glanced once in the mirror. The farmhouse, the silos, the old church, they were still there, silent witnesses to a darkness that had been hiding in plain sight. Some stains never wash away, but at least for once, the truth had been dragged screaming into the light. 2 days after the arrest, Willow Creek felt different. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried the weight of secrets exposed. The farmhouse stood boarded and silent, a grave marker for the Turners' tragedy. I visited Noah one last time before leaving. He sat on the steps of the community center, a blanket over his shoulders, eyes hollow but searching. Freedom hadn't given him peace, only space to face the memories that wouldn't let go. "They can't hurt you anymore," I said quietly. He nodded, but his voice cracked when he answered, "Doesn't change what they took." The townsfolk avoided my gaze as I walked down Main Street. Some whispered thanks. Others glared as if I'd peeled the skin off a wound they wanted hidden forever. Truth doesn't heal its scars. But sometimes scars are all that keep a place honest. Driving out of Willow Creek, I caught a final glimpse of the church's stained glass window, shattered and boarded up. A reminder that light had forced its way through once, even if it left damage behind. Cases like these don't end with handcuffs. They linger in the people, the soil, the shadows. And somewhere in this country, another town waits. Another silence rots. Another truth begs to be unearthed.